Everyone told Christian Matthew that money couldn't buy loyalty. He didn't believe them until he was 78 years old, dying and surrounded by vultures masquerading as children. They were waiting for him to take his last breath so they could tear apart his empire. So on a rainy Tuesday in November, the billionaire vanished. He walked into a run-down diner on the outskirts of Seattle, wearing a thrift store coat and a scowl. He wasn't looking for food. He was looking for an heir. He ordered a coffee, made a scene, and left a $5 tip that was meant to be an insult. But the waitress didn't get angry. She did something that stopped Christian cold and forced him to rewrite a $3 billion will that very night. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That was exactly how Christian Matthew felt as he stepped out of the back of a taxi, not his limousine, but a yellow cab that smelled of stale tobacco and pine air freshener. He instructed the driver to stop 3 blocks away from the Rusty Spoon, a diner that looked like it was holding on to existence by sheer force of habit. Christian pulled the collar of his coat up. It was a wool coat he'd bought at a Salvation Army 3 towns over for $12. It smelled of mothballs. Underneath, he wore a frayed flannel shirt and work boots that were 2 sizes too big. To the world, he was just another old man forgotten by time. To Wall Street, he was the Iron Wolf, the CEO of Matthew Dynamics, a man worth an estimated $3.2 billion. But today, Christian felt every cent of that wealth weighing on his chest like a tombstone. He pushed open the door of the diner. A bell jingled weakly. The air inside was thick with the scent of frying bacon, burnt coffee, and despair. It was the lunch rush, or what passed for it in this part of town. Truckers, weary shift workers, and a few teenagers skipping school filled the booths. Christian shuffled to a small booth in the back near the restrooms. He sat down heavily, coughing a wet, rattling sound that wasn't part of the act. The stage 4 lung cancer was very real. He checked his watch, a cheap plastic digital one he'd swapped his Rolex for. 12:15 p.m. "Be right with you, hon." The voice cut through the clatter of silverware. Christian looked up to see a blur of movement. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that defied the laws of physics. Her name tag crooked and slightly smudged would Sarah. Christian watched her. This was the test. He had done this in 5 other restaurants across the city over the last month. In the first, the waiter had ignored him for 20 minutes because he looked poor. In the second, the waitress had sneered when he asked for water. In the third, the manager had asked him to leave before he even ordered, citing a loitering policy. He wanted to see if humanity still existed. He needed to know if there was anyone left in the world who treated a human being like a human being without seeing a $sign attached to their forehead. Sarah rushed over, balancing 3 plates on one arm. She dropped them off at a table of rowdy construction workers who were openly leering at her. She ignored them with a practiced, weary smile, then turned to Christian. "Sorry about the wait," she said, pulling a notepad from her apron. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and her shoes looked like they were falling apart. "Rough weather out there. Can I start you off with some coffee?" Christian grunted, keeping his head down. "Water. Tap. And I want to see a menu, but don't expect me to order the lobster." It was a rude, abrasive opening. Most servers would have rolled their eyes. Sarah just smiled, a genuine, soft expression that reached her eyes. "Fresh out of lobster, I'm afraid. But the meatloaf is pretty good today. I'll get that water." She returned 30 seconds later with the water. No ice, just as requested. "I need a straw," Christian snapped. "I have shaky hands." "Of course." She produced one instantly. "And this table is sticky," Christian complained, running a finger over the formica. "Disgusting." Sarah didn't sigh. She didn't look at the ceiling. She set the water down, pulled a rag from her apron, and scrubbed the table until it squeaked. "Better?" she asked gently. "I know how annoying that is. My pop hates sticky tables too." Christian stared at her. "Your pop? My dad?" she said, her voice dropping a decibel, losing a bit of its professional cheer. "He's particular, like you." "I'm not particular," Christian grumbled. "I'm old. There's a difference." "Fair enough." She laughed. "So meatloaf, or are you a breakfast for lunch kind of guy?" "Coffee, black, and a slice of cherry pie. But heat it up. If it's cold, I'm sending it back." "You got it." For the next hour, Christian Matthew made Sarah Jenkins' life a living hell. He sent the coffee back 3 times. Once it was too hot, once too cold, and once tasted like mud. He complained that the pie was too sweet. He dropped his fork on the floor on purpose twice, just to watch her bend down and pick it up. Through it all, Sarah never broke. She was rushing between 6 tables, dealing with a broken soda machine and a screaming toddler at table 4. But every time she came back to Christian, she treated him with a strange, patient grace. It confused him. His own daughter Beatrice had thrown a wine glass at a maid last week because the Chardonnay was room temperature. His son Richard had fired a secretary for looking him in the eye. "Why are you so nice, Christian?" thought, watching Sarah wipe sweat from her forehead. "What's your angle?" Finally, Christian signaled for the check. The total came to $8.50. He pulled out a rugged Velcro wallet. He fumbled with the bills, making sure she saw that he had a few 20s, but mostly singles. He placed a $10 bill on the table. "Keep the change?" she asked, reaching for it. "No." Christian snatched the bill back. "I need change. Break it." She blinked, surprised, but nodded. "Sure." She came back with a $5 bill and 5 ones. Christian took the 5 ones and shoved them into his pocket. He left the single $5 bill on the table. Then he leaned in, looking her right in the eye. "Service was slow," he lied, "and the pie was soggy." He stood up, feigning a limp, and began to walk away. A $5 tip on an $8.50 check was actually generous, almost 60%. But the context was the key. He had occupied her table for 90 minutes during a rush, complained about everything, made her work triple time, and then criticized her to her face. Most people would have been relieved he was leaving. Christian pushed open the door and stepped back out into the freezing Seattle rain. He waited. Usually this was the part where the server muttered "jerk" under their breath. Or in one case in Chicago, the waiter had followed him out and thrown the coins at his back. Christian walked slowly toward the corner where he'd told the cab to wait. He counted his steps. 1, 2, 3. "Sir." "Excuse me." "Sir." Christian stopped. A small smile touched his lips. Here it comes, he thought. The anger. The indignation. Let's hear it. He turned around. Sarah was running through the rain, wearing only her thin diner uniform. She was shivering instantly, her hair plastering to her face. She held the $5 bill in her hand. Christian braced himself for the insult. "You forgot this," Sarah said, breathless, extending her hand. The $5 bill was damp from the rain. Christian stared at the money, then at her. The rain dripped from her nose. "I didn't forget it," he grunted, playing the part of the curmudgeon to the bitter end. "It's your tip. I told you the service was slow, but I'm not a thief." Sarah didn't retract her hand. She took a step closer, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that made Christian uncomfortable. It was a look of concern, not gratitude. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly from the cold. "I saw your wallet." Christian froze. Had she seen his platinum American Express card tucked in the hidden fold? Had he been sloppy? "You mostly had singles," Sarah continued, her voice soft. "And you ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and you stayed inside for a long time just to stay warm. I know things are hard. I've been there." Christian was stunned into silence. She thought he was destitute. She thought he was a homeless man, stretching a cup of coffee to escape the cold. "I can't take this," she said, pressing the $5 bill into his rough, calloused hand. $5 is a meal. Please, take it back." I don't need your charity, girl," Christian stammered. This was not in the script. The script was simple. He was rude. They were angry. He confirmed humanity was doomed. "It's not charity," Sarah said firmly. She reached into her apron pocket. "And wait." She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a coupon. "This is for a free early bird breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. It expires tomorrow. I was going to use it, but you take it. Come back tomorrow morning. Ask for me. I'll make sure the coffee is actually hot this time." She smiled again, that same genuine, heart-breaking smile. "Why?" Christian asked. The single word rasped out of his throat. "I was terrible to you." Sarah shrugged, wrapping her arms around herself to ward off the chill. "My brother is sick, really sick, and some days he's just angry. He yells at me, he throws things. But I know it's not him. It's the pain." She looked Christian in the eye. "You look like you're in pain, sir. You don't have to be nice to deserve a hot meal." She shivered violently. "I have to go back in. My manager will kill me. Please take the money. And use the coupon." She turned and ran back toward the diner, the bell jingling as she vanished into the warmth and grease of the rusty spoon. Christian Matthew stood alone on the street corner. The $5 bill and the crumpled coupon felt heavy in his hand, heavier than the billion-dollar merger contracts he signed on a monthly basis. The rain soaked through his cheap coat, chilling him to the bone, but his chest felt like it was on fire. "You look like you're in pain." She had seen him. Not the billionaire, not the CEO. She had seen the dying old man that even his own children refused to acknowledge. A black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the curb silently. The window rolled down. "Mr. Matthew," the driver, a large man named Kavanaugh, asked with concern. "You've been standing in the rain for 5 minutes. Are you all right?" Christian didn't answer immediately. He looked at the coupon. Free early bird breakfast. Value $4.99. "Kavanaugh," Christian said, his voice changing. The rasp was gone, replaced by the steel tone of command that had built an empire. "Get me my phone." "Yes, sir." Christian climbed into the back of the car. The leather seats were heated. The air smelled of expensive leather and isolation. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "James O'Connell," a voice answered on the second ring. It was his personal lawyer and oldest friend. "Jimmy," Christian said, "I need you at the penthouse. Tonight, 7 o'clock. "Christian, is everything okay? You sound strange. Did the doctor give you bad news?" "No," Christian said, staring out the window as the rusty spoon faded into the rainy distance. "The doctor told me I'm dying. I knew that. But I just found out I've been living wrong. I don't understand." The will, Jimmy, the draft we finalized last month. The one giving the estate to Richard and Beatrice. Yes, it's ready for signature. Bring it, Christian said. And bring a shredder. We're starting over. Starting over, Christian. That's 3,000 pages of legal structuring. You can't just... I said, bring it. Christian snapped, then softened his tone. And Jimmy, hire a private investigator. The best one you know. I need a full background check on a woman named Sarah Jenkins. She works at a diner on 4th and Pike. I want to know everything. Her debts, her family, her history. Everything. Is she a threat? Christian? Is she a con artist? Christian looked at the coupon in his hand. Sarah, the name scrawled on the back in blue ink. No, Christian whispered. She's the only real thing I've found in 10 years. He hung up the phone. As the car sped toward the opulent prison of his penthouse, Christian closed his eyes. He thought of his son, Richard. Just yesterday, Richard had asked for an advance on his inheritance to cover a gambling debt in Monaco. He hadn't asked how Christian's chemotherapy was going. He hadn't noticed Christian was coughing blood. And then there was Sarah, a girl who probably made $4 an hour plus tips trying to give money back to a grumpy old man because she thought he needed it more. Christian opened his eyes. They were cold and hard. Kavanaugh, he said. Sir, cancel my meetings for tomorrow morning. All of them. Even the board meeting with the Japanese investors. Especially that one, Christian said. I have a breakfast date, and I need to find out just how sick Sarah Jenkins' brother really is. Christian didn't know it yet, but he had just started a war. By the time the sun set tomorrow, his children would know he was up to something. And when the Matthew children felt their inheritance threatened, they didn't play nice. They played for blood. The old man touched the breast pocket of his coat where the $5 bill sat. Let the games begin, he whispered. The penthouse of the Matthew Tower was less a home and more a museum of silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle. The city lights glittering like spilled diamonds below, but inside the air was stagnant. Christian Matthew sat in his leather armchair, the oxygen cannula looped over his ears, hissing softly. Across from him sat James O'Connell, his lawyer, for 40 years. James looked as though he had aged a decade since their phone call a few hours ago. Between them on the mahogany coffee table sat a heavy stack of documents, the Matthew Estate Trust. It was the culmination of Christian's life work, a legal fortress designed to pass his billions to Richard and Beatrice while minimizing taxes. Do it, Christian commanded, his voice low. James hesitated, his hand hovering over the heavy-duty shredder they had wheeled into the study. Christian, please. Think about this. Even if you're angry with the kids, this is nuclear. If we destroy this draft and if something happens to you tonight, the estate goes into probate. The government will take 40%. The wolves will tear the company apart. The wolves are already in the house, James. Christian coughed, grabbing a handkerchief to cover his mouth. When he pulled it away, he quickly folded it, so James wouldn't see the speck of red. I'd rather the government take it than those two ungrateful parasites. Christian leaned forward, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Richard hasn't called me in 3 months, except to ask for a wire transfer. Beatrice moved my hospice nurse to the guest house because she didn't like the smell of medicine in the main hallway. I built an empire, James, but I raised failures. He pointed a shaking finger at the shredder. Destroy it. James sighed, defeated. He fed the first sheaf of papers into the machine. The mechanical whir crunch filled the room, a violent sound that felt strangely satisfying to Christian. They watched in swoons as the legacy of Richard and Beatrice was reduced to confetti. Just as the last page disappeared, the elevator doors at the far end of the hall dinged. A man in a beige trench coat stepped out. He was wet from the rain, holding a manila envelope tight against his chest. This was Robert Cole, the private investigator James had hired on retainer for the firm. He was expensive, discreet, and terrifyingly efficient. "Mr. Matthew. Mr. O'Connell." Cole nodded, shaking the rain off his hat. He didn't sit down. He walked straight to the table and placed the envelope in front of Christian. "That was fast," Christian said. "Sarah Jenkins is not a ghost, sir," Cole said, his voice gravelly. "People like her leave a paper trail, not of crimes, but of survival." Christian opened the envelope. The first thing he saw was a photo of Sarah looking much younger, wearing a cap and gown. She was smiling a real smile, not the tired one from the diner. Sarah Jenkins, aged 24. Cole began reciting from memory. Graduated high school valedictorian, accepted into the University of Washington's pre-med program on a partial scholarship. She wanted to be a pediatric oncologist. Christian ran his thumb over the photo. "She's not a doctor. She's pouring coffee." "She dropped out 3 years ago," Cole said. He pulled a second photo from the stack. It showed a teenage boy, pale and thin, sitting in a wheelchair. "This is Tobias Jenkins, her younger brother. He was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy complicated by a severe heart defect. Their parents died in a car wreck when Sarah was 19. She became his sole legal guardian." The room went silent, save for the hiss of the oxygen tank. "The insurance?" Christian asked. "Capped out 2 years ago," Cole replied. "The state aid covers the basics, but Tobias needs round-the-clock care and specialized medication that costs $4,000 a month. Sarah works double shifts at the Rusty Spoon, and she cleans offices at night. I checked her credit report, Mr. Matthew. It's a bloodbath. She has maxed out 3 credit cards paying for his respirator equipment. She is currently $145,000 in debt." Christian closed his eyes. He thought of the $5 bill in his pocket. She was drowning. She was suffocating under the weight of a world that didn't care about her or her dying brother. And yet when she saw a grumpy, rude old man, who she thought was hungry, she gave him $5. She didn't give him what she could spare. She gave him what she couldn't spare. "There's one more thing," Cole said, his voice softening slightly. "I spoke to the landlord of their apartment complex. He said he's evicting them next Tuesday. They're 3 months behind on rent." Christian's eyes snapped open. "Evicting a dying boy. Business is business, sir." Cole shrugged, though he looked distasteful. Christian stood up. The sudden movement made him dizzy, but he gripped the table, his knuckles turning white. "Not anymore," Christian growled. "James, get your notepad. We are writing a new will. Tonight." "Christian," James warned, "you can't just leave everything to a waitress you met once. The courts will overturn it. They'll say you were senile. Richard will sue her into oblivion. He'll destroy her." "I know." Christian smiled, a cold, predatory smile that hadn't been seen in the Matthew boardroom for years. "That's why I'm not leaving it to her. Not directly. We're going to be smarter than that. We're going to set a trap." He looked at the photo of Sarah and her brother. "Cole," Christian said, "find out who owns that apartment building. I want to buy it. Cash, first thing in the morning." "Sir." "You heard me. Buy the building. And the eviction notice, I want it framed." Christian turned to the window, looking out at the city that he had conquered. He finally had a mission. He wasn't just dying anymore. He was plotting. "Now," Christian whispered to the reflection of the city, "let's see how Richard handles losing his allowance." The next morning, the sun did not rise in Seattle. The sky remained a bruised purple-gray, hanging low over the city. In the private dining room of the exclusive Azure Club, Richard Matthew was throwing a tantrum. He was 45 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah Jenkins earned in a year, and he was red-faced with rage. "What do you mean he's not at the meeting?" Richard shouted into his phone. He slammed his fist onto the white tablecloth, making the silverware jump. "The Japanese delegation is waiting. This merger is the only thing keeping the stock price above water." On the other end of the line, Christian's executive assistant. A terrified woman named Linda stammered, I don't know, Mr. Matthew." He called in and said he was unavailable. He said he had a prior engagement. "A prior engagement," Richard scoffed. "He's dying. His only engagement is with the Grim Reaper." "Where is he, Linda?" I can't say. He took the car." But Kavanaugh isn't answering. Richard hung up and looked across the table at his sister Beatrice. She was picking at a grapefruit with a silver spoon, looking bored. She adjusted her diamond earrings, catching the light. "He's finally lost it, hasn't he?" Beatrice said lazily. "The chemo brain. It's turned his mind to mush. We should have invoked power of attorney months ago, Richie. I told you." "Shut up, Bea," Richard snapped. "This isn't just senility. He shredded the will." Beatrice froze. The spoon hovered halfway to her mouth. She slowly lowered it. "Who told you that—" "My source in legal," Richard hissed. "Old man O'Connell was at the penthouse until 3:12 a.m. They brought in a shredder and a private investigator." Beatrice's face hardened. The boredom vanished, replaced by the sharp reptilian alertness that made her dangerous. "A PI. Why is he investigating us?" "I don't know." Richard paced the room. "But if he shredded the trust, we are exposed. If he dies intestate, it takes years to settle. Or worse, he could be writing us out." "For who?" Beatrice laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Who else is there, the cat?" "I don't know." Richard grabbed his coat. "But I'm going to find out. I tracked his phone." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "You put a tracker on Dad's phone." "I put a tracker on everything, Beatrice. It's called risk management." Richard held up his own phone, showing a blinking blue dot on a map of downtown Seattle. "He's not at the hospital. He's not at the office." He zoomed in. The dot was hovering over a gritty industrial district south of the city center. "He's at a diner," Richard said, confused. "The Rusty Spoon. What in God's name is he doing there?" Beatrice stood up, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "Maybe he's meeting a woman." "A woman?" Richard sneered. "He's 78 and on oxygen. Men are men, Richie. Even when they're dying. Especially when they're dying. If some tart has her claws in him, if she's convincing him to sign things." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The threat was clear. "Let's go," Richard said. "If he's meeting someone, I want to meet them too." 5 miles away, Christian Matthew sat in the same booth at the Rusty Spoon. He looked different today. He was still wearing the old coat, but he had shaved. He looked cleaner, though still frail. He sat nervously, his hands clasping the coupon. The diner was quieter this morning. The breakfast rush was over. "You came back." Christian looked up. Sarah was there, holding a pot of coffee. She looked even more exhausted than the day before. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying, but her smile was there, holding on by a thread. "I had a coupon," Christian said gruffly, waving the paper. "Didn't want to waste it." "Well, I'm glad," she said, pouring his coffee. "I made sure this pot is fresh, scalding hot, just how you hate it." Christian actually chuckled. It was a rusty sound unused for years. "Your cheeky girl." It keeps me sane, she said. She lowered her voice. Did you eat dinner last night? Christian felt a lump in his throat. She was worried about him. I did. He lied. A feast, thanks to you. Sarah's shoulders relaxed. Good. That's good. She began to walk away, but Christian spoke up. Sit down. Sarah paused. I can't, sir. I'm on the clock. The manager. There's nobody here, Christian said, gesturing to the empty tables. Just for a minute. My legs, they hurt. I don't like eating alone. Sarah hesitated, checking the kitchen door, then slid into the booth opposite him. Just for a minute, she whispered. My name is Sarah, by the way. I don't think I told you. Christian, he said. He didn't give his last name. Tell me, Sarah, why do you do it? Do what? Smile. When everything is rubbish. Christian gestured vaguely at the run-down diner at the rain outside, hinting at her life. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were chapped and red from scrubbing dishes. Because if I stop, she said softly, I think I'll break. And Toby needs me not to break. Your brother, Christian said. She nodded, tears instantly welling in her eyes. She brushed them away angrily. Sorry. Rough night. He had a bad episode. We had to go to the ER at 2:00 a.m. They stabilized him, but the doctor said his lungs are getting weaker. She looked up at Christian, her eyes piercing him. He's 18, Christian. He's never been on a date. He's never seen the ocean. He just sits in that room and struggles to breathe. And all I can do is serve eggs and hope I make enough tips to keep the power on. She took a deep breath. So I smile, because if I'm angry, then the world wins. And I won't let it win. Christian stared at her. He saw the steel in her spine. It was the same steel he had when he was young, building his company from a garage. But his steel was forged in greed. Hers was forged in love. Suddenly, the front door of the diner banged open. The bell didn't just jingle. It rattled violently against the glass. Christian didn't turn around, but he saw Sarah's eyes widen in confusion. Dad? The word hung in the air, sharp and incredulous. Christian closed his eyes for a brief second, sighing. The peace was over. The war had arrived. He turned slowly in the booth. Standing in the doorway of the Rusty Spoon, looking like aliens in their designer trench coats and Italian leather shoes, were Richard and Beatrice. Behind them, the rain poured down. Richard stepped forward, his eyes scanning the diner with disgust, until they landed on Christian. Then they slid to Sarah. He looked her up and down, seeing the stained apron, the messy hair, the cheap name tag. A sneer curled his lip. So, Richard said, his voice dripping with venom. This is her. The prior engagement. Beatrice stepped up beside him, crossing her arms. She looks expensive, Dad, but I think you're overpaying. Sarah stood up, confused and defensive. Excuse me. Who are you? Christian stood up too. He didn't need the cane this time. He drew himself up to his full height, the frailty vanishing, replaced by the imposing posture of the Iron Wolf. Sit down, Sarah, Christian said, his voice cold and commanding. My children have arrived, and they are just leaving. Richard laughed, stepping closer to the booth, invading their space. We're not going anywhere, old man. Not until we find out why you're playing house with the help while the company burns. He turned to Sarah, pulling out a checkbook. All right, sweetheart, Richard said, clicking a gold pen. Let's cut to the chase. How much? How much to leave him alone and never say the name Matthew again, 10,020? Sarah looked from the checkbook to Christian, her face draining of color. Matthew, she whispered. Christian. Matthew. She knew the name. Everyone in Seattle knew the name. It was on the hospitals, the skyscrapers, the news. Christian looked at her, seeing the betrayal in her eyes. She realized he hadn't been a poor old man. He had been a billionaire testing her. Sarah. Christian started reaching out. Don't! She stepped back, her voice trembling. You're him. The billionaire. Yes, Richard interrupted, ripping a check out and slamming it on the sticky table. He is, and you're done. Take the money and get back to the kitchen. Christian's hand moved faster than anyone expected. He snatched the check from the table and tore it in half. I said, Christian's voice was a low growl that shook the booth. Get out. Richard's face turned purple. You're making a mistake, Dad. We're doing this for your own good. We're going to file for competency. We'll have you locked up in a facility before you can give a dime to this waitress. Christian smiled. It was terrifying. Kavanaugh! Christian shouted. The kitchen door swung open. Kavanaugh, the massive driver, had been waiting in the back by the grease trap, as per Christian's instructions. He stepped out, filling the hallway. Escort my children to the curb, Christian said calmly. If they resist, throw them. Kavanaugh cracked his knuckles. Richard and Beatrice stepped back, fear flashing in their eyes. They knew Kavanaugh, and they knew he didn't like them. This isn't over, Beatrice hissed at Sarah. You watch your back, little girl. They turned and fled the bell, jingling frantically behind them. Silence returned to the diner. Christian turned back to Sarah. She was standing against the counter, shaking. She looked at the torn check on the table, then at Christian. You lied to me, she whispered. You pretended to be hungry. You pretended to be poor. Why is this a game to you? Do you like laughing at people like me? No, Christian said, his heart breaking. Sarah, please. Get out, she said, tears spilling over. She pointed to the door. Take your money and your driver and get out. I don't want your help, and I don't want to see you again. Christian stood there, the most powerful man in the city, rendered powerless by the grief of a waitress. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the coupon. He placed it gently on the table. I'll go, Christian said softly. But I wasn't lying about one thing. I was hungry, Sarah. Starving. I just didn't know what for until I met you. He walked out into the rain, leaving Sarah alone with the torn check and the cold coffee. But Christian wasn't done. Richard had made his move. Now it was time for the counterattack. As he got into the car, Christian picked up the phone. Cole, he said, execute phase 2 and tell the hospital to prepare a private suite. We're moving the boy tonight. Tonight, Sir Sarah won't agree to that. She won't have a choice, Christian said, watching the diner through the rain-streaked window. Richard threatened her. He's going to come back. I need to get them to safety before he destroys her life just to spite me. Christian looked at his shaking hands. The war has started, Cole. Burn it all down. Sarah Jenkins lived in a building that the city of Seattle had forgotten. It was a brick block in the Rainier Valley, where the streetlights flickered and the hallways smelled of boiled cabbage and mildew. When she arrived home after the confrontation at the diner, she was trembling. It wasn't just the cold rain soaking through her thin uniform. It was the aftershock of adrenaline. She had shouted at a billionaire. She had thrown Christian Matthew, the man whose name was on the skyline, out of a diner. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B, her legs feeling like lead. She fumbled with her keys, her mind racing. He lied. He watched me struggle, and he just sat there and judged me. She pushed the door open. Toby, I'm home. I brought soup. The apartment was dark. Usually the glow of Tobias's medical monitor provided a dim, rhythmic blue light, but today the room was pitch black. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. "Toby." She flipped the light switch. Nothing. The power was out. "Sarah." A weak, terrified voice came from the bedroom. Sarah dropped her bag and ran. In the bedroom, Tobias was gasping. The battery backup on his ventilator was beeping a frantic low battery warning. The red light was flashing rapidly. "Toby. Oh God." Sarah fell to her knees beside his wheelchair. "It's okay, breathe. Just breathe." Lights went out. An hour ago. Tobias wheezed, his face pale and clammy. "Chest hurts. Sarah, I've got you," she said, her hands shaking as she checked the battery gauge. 4%. He had maybe 10 minutes of assisted breathing left. She grabbed her phone to call the power company, but before she could dial, a heavy pounding shook the front door. Bang. 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 "Maintenance," a voice shouted. Sarah rushed to the door and threw it open. Standing there was Mr. Henderson, the landlord. He was a sweating, nervous man, who usually couldn't look Sarah in the eye because he knew the mold in the bathroom was illegal. But today he looked different. He looked desperate. "Mr. Henderson." "The power is out," Sarah screamed. "My brother is on life support. You have to turn the breaker back on. Can't do that." "Sarah," Henderson said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. He held up a piece of paper. "I'm shutting the building down. Emergency electrical repairs. Code violation. Everyone has to vacate." "Now." "Vacate." Sarah stared at him. "It's raining." "My brother can't move. We have nowhere to go." Henderson looked down at his shoes. "I'm sorry. You have to leave. The inspectors said it's unsafe." Sarah saw something in his hand. It wasn't just the eviction notice. Crushed in his palm, half hidden, was a thick envelope. It was white crisp and bulged in a way that only a stack of fresh $100 bills would make an envelope bulge. She realized it instantly. "He paid you," Sarah whispered, the horror dawning on her. The man in the suit. Richard Matthew. "He paid you to cut the power." Henderson flinched. "I don't know who you're talking about. I just know you owe 3 months' rent, and this building is condemned as of 10 minutes ago. Get out, Sarah, or I call the sheriff." He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the dark hallway. She stumbled back into the apartment. The ventilator beeped faster. Beep, beep, beep. 3%. She was trapped. Richard Matthew wasn't just mean. He was trying to kill them. He was showing her that he could snuff out their lives as easily as flipping a switch just to punish her for embarrassing him. Sarah ran to Tobias. She began to unhook the heavy machine, trying to figure out how to manually pump his lungs with the ambubag. "We have to go, Toby. We have to go now." "Where?" Tobias gasped, tears leaking from his eyes. "I don't know," she sobbed. Suddenly the front door didn't just open. It was kicked in. Sarah screamed, shielding Tobias with her body. 3 men in dark, tactical rain gear stormed into the small living room. They weren't police. They moved with too much precision. Sarah grabbed a heavy brass lamp ready to swing. "Get back! Get away from him!" "Miss Jenkins, stand down!" the lead man barked. He pulled off his hood. It was the driver from the diner. Kavanaugh. He looked massive in the small room, filling the space with his presence. But his face wasn't angry. It was urgent. "We aren't here to hurt you," Kavanaugh said, his voice deep and calm. "Christian sent us. We know about the power." "Get out!" Sarah yelled, swinging the lamp wildly. "He did this. His son did this. Christian knows, Kavanaugh said, stepping forward and easily catching the lamp with one hand. He gently took it from her grip. Richard paid the landlord. He wants you on the street. Christian is trying to stop it. The ventilator let out a long, high-pitched whine. Battery depleted. The machine stopped hissing. Tobias's chest stopped moving. His eyes went wide with panic as the air cut off. "Toby!" Sarah screamed. "Medic!" Kavanaugh shouted over his shoulder. Two men rushed past him carrying a portable medical case. In seconds, they had a mask over Tobias's face and were pumping oxygen. One of them checked the boy's pulse. "Pulse is thready but stable. We need to move him. Now! The transport unit is downstairs." Sarah stood frozen, watching these strangers handle her brother with a speed and skill she had never seen. Kavanaugh turned to her. "Sarah, listen to me. You can stay here and wait for the sheriff to drag you out while your brother suffocates, or you can come with us. Christian has a private trauma unit set up. It's safe. It's warm. And Richard can't touch you there." "Why?" Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "Why is he doing this?" Kavanaugh looked at the dying boy, then back at Sarah. "Because he's ashamed," Kavanaugh said. "He's ashamed that his blood created the monster that just cut your power. Please, Miss Jenkins, let us save him." Sarah looked at Tobias. The color was returning to his cheeks as the medic pumped the oxygen bag. She had no money. She had no home. She had no choice. She nodded, defeated. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's move," Kavanaugh commanded. They lifted Tobias' wheelchair, and all with an effortless strength. Sarah grabbed her purse and her coat, and they swept her out of the apartment, down the dark stairwell, and out into the rainy night. 3 black SUVs were idling at the curb, their engines humming like sleeping beasts. The landlord Henderson was watching from the window. When he saw Kavanaugh glare up at him, he quickly pulled the blinds shut. They loaded Tobias into the back of a modified SUV that looked like an ambulance on the inside. Sarah climbed in beside him, holding his hand. As the convoy peeled away from the curb, splashing through the puddles, Sarah looked back at the building that had been her prison and her sanctuary. She was entering the world of Christian Matthew now. A world of billions of dollars, private armies, and ruthless cruelty. She squeezed Tobias's hand. "I will survive this," she vowed. "I will survive them." The drive took 20 minutes. They didn't go to a hospital. They drove north toward the cliffs overlooking the Puget Sound, to an estate that was less a house and more a fortress of glass and steel. The Matthew estate. The gates opened automatically as the convoy approached. They drove up a winding driveway lined with ancient cedar trees, arriving at a side entrance marked Medical Deliveries. Sarah was ushered out of the car. The air here smelled different, clean, like pine needles in the ocean. Tobias was whisked away by a team of doctors wearing white coats with the Matthew Dynamics logo embroidered on the pockets. "Wait, where are you taking him?" Sarah panicked, trying to follow. "He's going to the ICU wing." "Miss Jenkins," a nurse said, gently placing a hand on her arm. "Dr. Aris is the best pulmonologist in the state. He's scrubbing in now. Your brother is going to be stabilized. We have a suite prepared for you right next door, so you can watch through the glass." Sarah was led down a pristine white corridor. The floors were marble. The walls were lined with abstract art. It was quiet, a heavy, expensive silence. They brought her to a room that looked like a 5-star hotel suite, but one wall was entirely glass, looking into the adjacent hospital room. Sarah pressed her hands against the glass. Inside, Tobias was being transferred to a bed that looked like a spaceship. Monitors flickered to life. A doctor was intubating him, his movements calm and precise. It was a level of care Sarah had only seen in movies. No waiting rooms, no insurance forms, just immediate world-class salvation. She watched until Tobias's chest was rising and falling rhythmically with the new ventilator. He was sleeping. He looked peaceful. "He's safe." The voice came from the doorway. Sarah turned. Christian Matthew stood there. He looked terrible. The stress of the last 24 hours had taken a toll. His skin was grey, and he leaned heavily on a cane. But he wasn't wearing the thrift store coat anymore. He wore a dark silk robe and pajamas. He looked like what he was, a dying king. Sarah's relief at seeing Tobias safe clashed violently with her anger. "You brought us here," she said, her voice trembling. "You kidnapped us." "I extracted you," Christian corrected gently. He hobbled into the room and sat down in a velvet armchair. "My son, Richard. He moves fast. If I hadn't intervened, Tobias would be dead by morning. The cold in that apartment would have finished him." "You have no right," Sarah said, though the fire in her voice was dimming. "You played a game with my life. You tested me like I was a lab rat." "I tested you," Christian admitted, looking her in the eye. "Because I am surrounded by sharks. Sarah. Everyone I know, my board members, my lawyers, my own children, they look at me and they see a bank account. They calculate how many days I have left so they can cash out." He gestured toward the glass wall, looking at the sleeping boy. "I went to that diner looking for one person, just one, who would see a human being. I was ready to give up. I was going to let the vultures have it all. And then you gave me $5. Christian reached into his robe pocket. He pulled out the $5 bill. It was dried and wrinkled now. "This is the most valuable thing I own," Christian said softly. "It represents the only honest transaction I've had in 10 years. Sarah stared at the bill. "So what now? You save my brother, give me a check, and I disappear. Is that the deal?" "No," Christian said firmly. "I don't want you to disappear. I want you to stay." "Stay?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "In this house, with your psychopath son, trying to evict me." "Richard is a bully," Christian said, his voice hardening. "But he is a coward. He attacks the weak. He won't attack you here. Not while I'm alive." Christian leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "I'm rewriting my will, Sarah. But I'm not just leaving you money. Money ruins people. Look at my children. I gave them everything and they became nothing." He took a deep breath, and for a moment he looked terrified. "I want to leave you the foundation." Sarah blinked. What?" "The Matthew Foundation," Christian said. "It controls 40% of my company. It funds hospitals, schools' research, billions of dollars in assets. It needs a director. It needs someone with a heart, Sarah. Someone who knows what it's like to have the lights cut off. Someone who knows the value of $5. Sarah stepped back, shaking her head. "You're crazy. I'm a waitress. I didn't even finish college. I can't run $1 billion foundation." "You managed a household on minimum wage," Christian countered. "You kept a dying boy alive for 3 years with no help. You have more grit in your little finger than my entire executive board has in their spines." "I can't," Sarah whispered. "I don't belong in your world." "My world is dying, Sarah," Christian said. "Look at me. I have weeks, maybe days. I need to know that when I'm gone, the money won't be used to buy yachts and politicians. I need to know it will be used to help people like Tobias." He pointed to the glass. "If Richard gets the company, he will liquidate the foundation. He will close the research wings. He will sell the patents for the medicine that keeps your brother alive to the highest bidder. The threat hung in the air. It wasn't a threat from Christian. It was a reality check. You're asking me to go to war, Sarah realized. With your family. I'm asking you to win the war, Christian said. I will give you the weapons, the lawyers, the advisors, the authority. But you have to be the one to wield them. Sarah looked through the glass at Tobias. He was breathing easily for the first time in months. This house, this money, it could save him. It could save thousands of people like him. But the cost was walking into a snake pit. Before she could answer, the door to the suite burst open. It wasn't a nurse this time. It was James O'Connell, the lawyer. He was pale and holding a tablet. Christian! James gasped, ignoring Sarah. We have a problem. A big one. Christian didn't flinch. What did they do, James? Richard and Beatrice just filed an emergency motion with the King County Superior Court, James said, swiping on the tablet. They are claiming you are mentally incapacitated due to advanced stage cancer and undue influence from a predator. James looked at Sarah apologetically. They have a court order, Christian, James continued. They're coming with the police. They want to place you under immediate conservatorship. If they succeed, they freeze your assets. Tonight. Christian's face turned stony. They want to lock me away. They want to annul any changes to the will you've made in the last 48 hours, James said. They're trying to erase Sarah. Sarah felt the fear spike again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the helpless fear of the eviction. It was anger. She looked at Christian. The old man looked frail, trapped in his chair. He had tried to do one good thing, and his own blood was trying to destroy him for it. Christian looked at Sarah. You can leave, he said softly. Go out the back. Take the cash I have in the safe. Run. They won't chase you if you're not in the will. Sarah looked at the $5 bill in Christian's hand. She looked at her brother sleeping in the best bed he'd ever known. She thought of Richard's sneering face at the diner. Take the money and get back to the kitchen. Sarah Jenkins took a deep breath. She smoothed down her dirty diner apron, which she was still wearing. No, Sarah said. Christian looked up. No. I'm not running, Sarah said. She walked over and stood beside Christian's chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was a protective gesture, a daughter's gesture. James, Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. Does this house have a gate? Yes. James blinked. A reinforced steel gate. Lock it, Sarah commanded. Christian's eyes widened. A slow smile spread across his face. And call the press, Sarah added, her mind racing. If they want to claim Christian is crazy, let's let the world see him. Let's let them see the man who just saved a dying boy's life. She looked down at Christian. You wanted a partner, Christian. You got one. Let's rewrite that will. Christian, Matthew laughed. It was a defiant, joyful sound. He covered her hand with his own. Lock the gate, James, Christian ordered. The waitress is in charge. The hearing for the emergency conservatorship took place 3 days later. The King County Courthouse was besieged by reporters. Richard and Beatrice had leaked the story painting Sarah as a gold-digging caregiver who had seduced a senile old man. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Richard sat with his high-priced legal team smirking. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to humiliate his father. When Christian entered the room, went silent. He was in a wheelchair, breathing from an oxygen tank, but he wore his best suit. Sarah pushed him, her head held high. Ignoring the glare, Beatrice shot her way. Your Honor. Richard's lawyer began pacing like a panther. Mr. Matthew is clearly unwell. He attempted to rewrite a multi-billion-dollar estate to a woman he met once in a diner. These are the actions of a man who has lost his grip on reality. We are asking the court to freeze the assets to protect the Matthew legacy. The judge looked at Christian. "Mr. Matthew, do you understand where you are?" Christian signaled for the microphone. His voice was weak, but it echoed clearly. "I am in a room full of vultures," he rasped, "and I have never been more sane." "Then explain," the judge pressed gently. "Why the waitress? Why give an empire to a stranger?" Christian reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out legal documents. He pulled out the crumpled $5 bill. "Because of this," Christian said, holding it up. "My son sees $5 and sees nothing. He wouldn't bend over to pick it up. But this woman saw a starving old man, and she gave him this. It was her food money. It was her survival." He turned to look directly at Richard, his eyes blazing with a final dying fire. "You call her a stranger, Richard. She is the only person who treated me like a human being when I had nothing to offer her. You treated me like a bank vault. I am not rewriting my will because I am crazy. I am rewriting it because I am finally seeing clearly." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged the gavel, but the look in his eyes said everything. The motion for conservatorship was denied. Christian Matthew died 3 days later, watching the sunset over the Puget Sound, holding Sarah's hand. The reading of the will was brief. To Richard and Beatrice, Matthew Christian left a sealed envelope. Inside was a single $5 bill and a note. "So you can buy some humanity. Don't spend it all in one place." To Sarah Jenkins, he left the Matthew Foundation and the controlling interest in Matthew Dynamics, with one stipulation that she never let the company lose its soul. Today, the Matthew Jenkins Wing at Seattle Children's Hospital saves thousands of lives a year. And in the CEO's office, framed